started, what is it, 27 or 29 points of signature verification, 27, thank you. That's what you're supposed to do, is 27 points of signature verification. And at some point it went to 20, it went to 10. And towards the last few weeks, they were told, just stop checking signatures. We've got to get this done. So what he's showing us here does in some sense correlate with the things that people had told us. So for what it's worth. Okay, let's go to Doug Logan, Cyber Ninjas. You are going to give us your report. And would you please give us just a tad of your background?
Sure. So I'm Doug Logan. I'm the CEO of Cyber Ninjas. I have done cybersecurity work for a lot of major organizations, including Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase. I've done a decent amount of work in the federal government as well. I hold the Certified Information Systems Security Professionals, or CISSP. I also have GX Web Application Penetration Tester and GX Certified Incident Handler. I am listed as, I am actually an expert on the Antrim election case, and I have a report that's actually published associated with that that's publicly available from Matt DePerno's website. And I have, of course, been running this audit for the last roughly 5 months.
Mr. Logan, could you pull the mic, or could you get a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Is that better? Okay, awesome. It's not clicking. There we go. So I just want to start with an overview of what we actually accomplished here, because this is an audit like we've never had before. And it involved, as you mentioned earlier, Madam President, involved over 1,500 people. And based on our calculations, it was actually more than 100,000 hours put in place. As you can see up on the photo right now, this is an example. This actually happened in the evening one of the days. So this isn't even a full group of everybody. We're going to go through each role that was out there, what functions they were performing. But you'll notice that everyone is located based on colors. That helped us keep track of where people were and make sure no one was out of place, and help us make sure that we both secured and maintained custody of all the ballots at all times. So again, it was 2.1 million ballots that were processed by hand. That include both tallying and paper examination. Over 1,500 people and like 100,000 hours. Now, security was something that was extremely important with everything that we did here. We had multiple layers of security. We actually had an external perimeter that was maintained by the Arizona Rangers. So as you came in, they would validate that you're on a list of individuals in order to be able to get in. We also had an interior checks, so that as you walked through the door, you came up to a desk where you were both checked for COVID, and validated to be on the list, made sure you had a badge, and all those things to make sure that you were someone that was supposed to be there to even be in the building. All the ballots and election equipment were stored within these cages, and anytime they ever left the cage, they were actually signed out by an individual. So we have a complete signed record of every individual that came and picked up every box. So someone took over custody of that box. We actually had individuals called runners, and they would run it from the ballot corral, and they'd take it over to whatever table they need to go to. And that individual would then sign the box over to the table manager at the table that would then utilize it to process it. So at no time was a box of ballots or individual ballots outside of the care of someone's specific authorized care who has to sign off of it. In fact, we actually had 24/7 video surveillance on everything at all times. In addition, you'll see this lovely police officer. They were actually there 24/7 as well, and they were always within sight of the ballot corrals or where we had the election equipment stored. We had police officers at both locations, always maintaining and always making sure that the ballots and the equipment was 100% secure, and that nothing could happen to them. So this is one of our tallying tables. What you can see in the middle is actually a lazy Susan. You'll notice that there's 3 counters around the table. There's someone who's actually at this table, they're loading, and someone who's unloading. So all counters were Maricopa residents who specifically voted in the last election. We wanted to make sure that if anyone was involved in this very important action, that they had skin in the game, and they were local. We didn't use anyone out of state for any functions having to do with the actual tallying of the ballots, or I should say actually tallying the ballots. Some of the table managers were from out of state, but the people actually counting the ballots were all Maricopa residents. There were other functions where we had volunteers from other states, though as much as possible we tried to keep everybody local in Maricopa County. We think it's very important for our local community to take ownership for their election process, and we wanted to facilitate that as much as possible. All these individuals were background checked and validated. We had one individual that had slipped through the process because he'd been on the ballot versus specifically that does not something shows up in standard background checks. So we started doing additional checks, comparing everything on things to make sure that never happened again. It was very important to us to make sure that we always had things that were going to make sure that were beyond reproach. Transparency in everything we did was very, very important. Now, all three counters were blind. That means they were not allowed to talk to each other. As that ballot went around and was in front of them, they would tally on a sheet of paper and they put a little mark based on whether, for both the presidential and the Senate race, they put a mark to see whatever it was. Roughly every 50 ballots, they would compare the numbers with each other. Actually, the table manager would take them and compare them, and if 2 out of 3 of them agreed, and the third person was no more than 1 count off for the race, they would proceed and they would move on. If there was any more discrepancies beyond that, they actually had to stop. They had to find the ballots in question, that they're in question, they had to recount them. So there was absolutely no way to have speed here without having accuracy. And we found that when we had a brand new table, it was relatively slow. But as soon as they've been doing it for about 2 shifts or so, their speed greatly increased, and it was amazing at how quickly they could count ballots. In the very beginning of the process, in our first 3 weeks, our fastest, I think that our most ballots we ever counted was roughly 30,000. When we came back and had more of a full shop, I think at our peak we did over 150,000 ballots in a day, and we're routinely doing over 100,000. So the speed, like I said, greatly increased, especially as we work through this. Okay. So the way the ballots would actually work is we had a ballot corral where the ballots were originally in. They would be signed out of that ballot corral and they'd be taken to a tally table. After they were tallied, they'd go back to a ballot corral which was specific to being in progress. And then when we had our paper examination tables, they were ready for a box of ballots. That's where it came. It came out of the in progress. So at the paper examination tables, we had DSLR cameras. Those DSLR cameras took pictures on the front and the back of these ballots, and they gave us very high definition images that allowed us to see all sorts of intricacies of the paper and what's going on. After it was done with DSLR, actually, excuse me, sir? I'm sorry, the clicker's not working? There we go. Let's go back there really quick. So once I went into the microscope stands, we had 4 microscopes. They were taking images of the magnified image, and that was over a number of different places. That included the presidential oval to take a look at how that was filled out. And with the way we had the lights, we could actually see when it was filled out with a ballpoint pen, you could actually see the ridges of the person pressing down on it. So you could tell the difference between something that was filled out with a Sharpie, you could tell something that was printed out by a pen, or you could tell actually if something was computer printed. You could tell the difference between all of them. We also had a microscope over certain parts of the ballot that would allow us to look at the paper fibers to help determine what type of paper was utilized. Now, when we were done with this, we actually had over 140 terabytes of data just from the paper examination alone. So we had massive amounts of data. In fact, with our camera footage and everything that ran the operation, we ended up with close to 2 petabytes of data. To give you a comparison, that is vastly more data that your average large 1,000-person company has. So we were running a very impressive network here that was completely air-gapped, wasn't connected to anything outside of the floor in order to support this, in order to have all the data requirements associated with it. It was a very complicated operation. So just I want to give a high-level status of where we are right now. So first of all, we've completed the hand counting of all federal races. We've done all the image and microscope capture of all the ballots. We've reviewed and did a comparison of the official results. We've done analysis of the voter rolls. We've done the vast majority of the analysis of the actual voting machines and voting equipment. In progress right now, we're hopeful to soon, with the settlement that the Senate put together, to be reviewing the spun logs and routers based on the settlement terms. We're also hoping that the completion of the paper analysis that's being done will be done very shortly. Now, from a scope standpoint, stopped again. So no longer in scope was the canvassing. That was decided, that was removed. We have the tabulate configuration to check internet configuration was something that was not provided. We believe with the other information we have, we'll be able to get similar data, but it will not be the same exact data. We had requested review the voter roll system, but a lot of the systems are used for checking in for the SIPUC system were not provided as part of the equipment that was given us. We had hoped to look at the review of the ICX devices, but again, those had not been provided. We had wanted to look at the provisional ballots, the ones that had not been counted, to count the sealed envelopes to make sure they matched up with everything and made sense. And those, again, were not provided. And we'd also hoped to take a look at the undeliverable ballots to see how many of them were bounced back or what happened to them. And again, those were not things that were provided. And so there were things that are no longer in scope and we're not able to take a look at. Okay, so now we'll get into the fun part and get more into the actual tallies and results. In order to understand some of these findings, I want to make sure that everyone has a clear picture as to how this process works. So if we have ballots that are actually damaged or otherwise can't be run through the tabulators, for example, the Braille ballots won't fit through the tabulators, some of the UCAVA ones are in formats that can't, they need to go through what's called a duplication process. Now this is a different thing than what Dr. Shiva was talking about when he talked about duplicates. When he talked about duplicates, he was talking about more than one envelope going to the same person. So we're going to talk about the word duplicates here, but we're actually talking about when there was an original ballot that couldn't be run through the scanner, and they created a copy of it, which was run through the scanner and counted. So when you have duplicates, when you have the originals and you have the duplicates, only one of those counted, and it should only be the duplicates. Now specifically, the originals are often referred to as damage sent to duplication, or DSD, and we're going to use that notation throughout things, that DSD means the original ballots, whereas the actual duplicates are referred to as dupes. So there should be one DSD per dupe, and there should be a unique serial number on every single DSD and every single dupe to match them up, so that you will know for sure that this ballot right here was duplicated to this other ballot. And if you want to compare and make sure the duplication process was done correctly and that it actually represented the voter intent, you'd be able to easily match them up, and it'd be easier to handle from an audit standpoint. Duplicate ballots also should be stored separately from the original ballots so there's not confusion, they don't get mixed up. So let's talk a little bit about those findings. So our duplicate ballots were commingled with the original ballots, not all of them. There were in at least one box case, which is something that they're not supposed to do according to the EPM. Duplicate ballots had incorrect and missing serial numbers. If you take a look at this table that's showing up, you'll notice the serial number on the left is what was actually on the ballot, of the duplicate ballot, and the serial number, the board 1 hand dupe 2114 on the right is what was actually on the original damaged. You'll notice the numbers are actually different. On the left hand side it says dupe board 3 hand 0 2114. On the right it says board 1 hand dupe 214. We were able to match these up because of the ballot characteristics and the precinct that it came from, but it's a very painful process and it has to be done manually in order to figure out what matches to what else when they're not actually stamped with the same exact serial number on them. We also had a number of serial numbers that were printed like this one that you see on the screen, where you can't really read it, it's not legible, so it theoretically has a serial number on it, but there's no way to match it up because you cannot read what the value is on it. In addition to having ballots that flat out did not have a serial number anywhere on there whatsoever, so there was no way to match them up with the originals. Now, we also had duplicate ballots that reuse serial numbers. You would expect that a serial number, in order to match it up, would end up being unique. But you'll notice that there's two examples up here of two different pairs that are not associated with each other, but had the same exact serial number utilized. In this case, I believe we've got a large print and a standard damage ballot. We also have a few others in here. Again, same exact serial number, but these were not the same ballots. And specifically, if you ever take a look at a large print ballot, they're huge. They're very, very large. So it's not just that something was photocopied or anything like that. They literally use the same serial number on otherwise unrelated ballots. And this is probably one of the more interesting parts, is that we had more duplicates than original ballots. So according to our counts from our audit, we had 26,965 original ballots, and then we had 29,557 that were duplicate ballots, and those numbers should be the same. Based on the numbers received from Maricopa County, we should have had 27,869 of both originals and duplicates, and they should have matched up perfectly. Now, these extra duplicates did appear to favor Trump and Jorgensen. If you take a look at the original ballots, we've got Trump has 995,404, and if you take a look at the duplicates, there's some number of more of them. So if you take a look at the percentage all the way over to the right, the expected percentage per candidate, and that's based on if we take the originals and assume the duplicates should be at the same exact percentage. So we had 48% of the originals were Trump, 50% of the originals were Biden, and 2% of the originals were Jorgensen. You can see what they actually have at the difference. In reality, Trump had 58% of the duplicates, 33 and 3. So both Trump and Jorgensen gained slightly with the duplicate process. Same thing when we take a look at the Senate race, it favors slightly to McSally, not necessarily as much as it does in the other case. Both of these percentages are within the realm of error, of just human error, of making mistakes. So if we take a look at our final tally results and we look at the Senate race, it does look like Kelly still shows up as ahead. And we actually run into that we have 541 less for McSally and 60 less for Kelly in the ballot totals. If we take a look at the presidential race, Trump actually loses 261 votes from the official votes. Biden gains 99, and Jorgensen loses 204 votes. And again, these are all very small numbers when we're talking about 2.1 million ballots. These are very small discrepancies. So we can say that the ballots that were provided to us to count in the Coliseum very accurately correlate with the official canvass numbers that came through. So we did have at least a batch of 50 ballots that was run through the tabulators twice. This is specifically when they took the Dominion tabulators, they had the same batch and it was run through more than one time. We found this because through our various counts, we had very clear confirmations of how many ballots were supposed to be in a box. And when we compared our results against the cast vote records, we were roughly 50 off, and that made us go take a look at the Dominion images. And when we compared it to nearby ballots, we actually found that there was a set of 50 ballots that had been run through, I said again, twice. As far as we could tell, with it only happening once, there's no indication as to whether that, we have no clear indication whether it was human error or whether it was intentional. We assume that's human error because it happened in very small frequency. This is an example of a ballot from two different batches. It's probably relatively small text for people to read, but if you read all the way down on the bottom, it'll tell you that it's tabulator, on the left-hand picture, tabulator 6004, BTC, which is the batch 288, and that's the image 154. And then on the right-hand side, we have, again, same tabulator, but batch number 287, which is one different, and it's image number 5. And we had roughly 50 of them that were in between the two of these. We found something similar from the UCAVA, where the UCAVA, for those of you who don't know, UCAVA ballots are for military and overseas personnel. It's a way that they can actually cast votes even though they're not physically here. Those ballots get turned in either via an online portal, they can be submitted via email, they can be mailed in, I think they can fax them in. There's a whole bunch of different ways these can come in. As a result, they're in a lot of different formats, and there's a lot of variance among them. But on the left-hand picture, you can actually see that it's board number 2, hand dupe 573 is what approved it. On the right-hand side, it's hand dupe 574, and it's probably too small for you to read, but if you read the serial number circled on the top left, you'll notice that the timestamp and the serial numbers are exactly the same, which means that someone likely printed out the Uokava ballot twice, and both of them made it into these things. We did not find this in a lot of quantities, but the only way we had to look at it was by hand. And there's over 10,000 Uokava ballots. Because every single one of these Uokava ballots is slightly different form, it's actually even difficult to do it in automated fashion. The only good way would be to go through by hand without some sophisticated processing. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the official results that are actually turned out by the county, and this actually connects quite a bit with some of the stuff that Dr. Shiva was talking about. So from a definition standpoint, we have the official canvass. The official canvass is the official certified results that are put out by the county. It has the tallies of votes per candidate, per precinct, and provisional. It tells what the turnout was for a given precinct and all of that information. We also have what's called, here in Maricopa County, they call it the VM55 file, or the final voted file. It is a list of every single person that showed up to vote. And that's counted both for in-person, whether it's early voting in person or whether it's mail-in, and all of those are kept track of separately. So we have a number of all those different categories of who showed up to vote on any given day. We then have the VM34 full voter file. This is also referred to as say, your voter rolls. This is a list of everybody who should be eligible to vote. And the county in Maricopa seems to make these available roughly on a monthly basis, so that the full voter rolls. So that is your theoretical full list of everyone that may be able to, may show up to vote at a given election. Then we have our EV32 files, or EV32 early vote-in sents. Every single time a mail-in ballot is sent, it's supposed to have an entry in an EV32 file that corresponds with that mail-in ballot that's sent out. Likewise, we have an EV33 file, which is when any type of early vote is returned. Now, this both includes when a mail-in ballot is received and an in-person, when someone comes and votes in person. EV33 includes both of those. You may remember at the hearing that we had a while ago, we had mentioned that the EV32s do not match the EV33s. We were doing a quick analysis in order to justify canvassing, and there were 74,000 that were off. The vast majority of those 74,000 were from early voting in person, and that is why there was not an EV32 associated with it. We have this clarified in our report as well. That was not a purposeful discrepancy. It was just something that was not immediately clear at that point. So just to give an example on how these systems work in order to match everything up. So if we have 10 people who mailed in a ballot, and we had 10 people who voted early in person, and we had 10 people who voted on election day in person, we have 30 votes that are out there. So what this means is we should have the official canvass with 30 votes, and it should be allocated per precinct accordingly. It should be allocated based on the candidates, and you should have your official tallies associated with it. You would also expect that if you went to your VM55 file, you should see 10 people who voted via mail-in, because it has different codes based on that. You should have 10 people who voted in person and 10 people who voted on election day, and every single one of those entries should have the name and address associated with the person that matches up with their voter rolls. Likewise, you would expect that your EV32 would only have 10 ballots mailed in it, because that was what was sent out. And your EV33 should have 10 people in it from the mail-in ballots and 10 people from the actual EV in person, for a total of 20. This is what you would expect in a balanced system. This is not actually what we found when we started comparing all these numbers. All these numbers were different in very different ways, and it's something that creates quite a few discrepancies. So none of these systems actually balanced. We're going to go through these. So our official canvass has 3,432 more ballots cast than the list of people who show as having cast a vote in the VM55 file. Now, I do want to specifically interject in here that we finally heard back from Maricopa County because we asked them about this discrepancy. I think it was at least a week ago, but it was a couple weeks ago. So the day before we were presenting our results, they decided to tell us that those were actually for the protected voters who don't actually, who are either judges or battered women or other individuals who are concerned about publishing their addresses, that is the reason why that discrepancy is in there. I can't validate whether that's accurate or not accurate. This is information that we've just received. What I can say is that this sort of stuff is exactly why with audits, usually the organization you're in the process of auditing cooperates and works with you. It would have been, would have been extremely helpful in order to get feedback and work through them through this entire process. Now, we do have 9,041 mail-in voters shown return ballots, more return ballots in EV33 than they were sent in EV32. Sounds like Dr. Shiva found something very similar to this as well. So specifically, we found they were mailed one ballot, but somehow 2 ballots were received, which I do not know how you would have 1 ballot sent and 2 received. The assumption would have to be that it's a clerical error or there's something else going on. It's not clear how you can have that happen. 277 precincts show in the official canvass as having more ballots cast than people showed up to vote, for a total of 1,551 excess votes. Again, the county has explained to us that the same reason for the VM55 difference they're saying is the reason there. We have not had a chance to validate that. There are 2,472 ballots shown in EV33 that don't have a corresponding entries in the VM55, and only 2,042 ballots show as rejected in the official canvass for a discrepancy of 430. So let's walk through this really quickly. So if something is in the EV33, that means that an early vote was received. And we have the individual's name and the voter ID associated with it. So if an EV33 was received, you would expect that if it's not in the VM55 file of who voted, then it had to be a rejected ballot. Just makes logical sense. It has to be a rejected ballot. But there's 2,472 that show in the EV33, but there's only 2,042 ballots that show as rejected. So there's a discrepancy of 430. Again, just another place where these show that they don't seem to match up. We also have 397 mail-in ballots show as received that were never shown as sent. So we know that they are in the VM55, they're mail-in ballots, and they were received without somehow ever being sent a ballot. Now, we also have 255,326 early votes shown in the VM55 that do not have a corresponding entry in the EV33. And just to be clear, this is not, when you were looking at EV33 entries, EV33 entries are supposed to happen when a ballot is received, but it's not, the actual tracking of the ballots are under the actual official canvass or the VM55. So we had, in the VM55, individuals who voted, we had entries for early voting that were in there, where in 255,000 cases of those, they were not actually included in the EV33 file. In reality, all these systems, to be audible and to be verifiable, all these systems should be able to be in agreement with each other. And even if we have protected voters, there should be some way to know the number of protected voters who voted in order to match it all up so that you have a system that balances. Okay. Voters who moved. So we took a look at the entire list of individuals who voted, and specifically that was from the VM55 final voted file, and we ran it through a commercial database called, that put out by Melissa, called Personator. And Personator is a best-in-class identity system that helps check addresses and make sure they're associated with the user. It'll show prior and current addresses, it'll track move dates, and it'll actually also track date of birth and date of deaths. So we went and took the voter rolls and we compared them against this to see how many people might have moved and based on statute should not have necessarily cast a vote. So the first thing we found is that 23,344 voters who voted via mail-in ballots, even though they showed in Melissa as having moved from that address. And we wanted to make sure we accounted for the circumstances where a college student might have moved away from home, or a family member might have moved somewhere else. So we actually eliminated all the all the cases where someone was still at that residence that had the same last name. That's how we came up with 23,344. So if your mail-in ballot is sent to an address that you no longer live at, there should be no way for you to receive that mail-in ballot. At least it's generally not a way for you to reset mail-in ballot, because mail-in ballots are legally not allowed to be forwarded. So it can't be forwarded to your new address. So the only way this situation could happen legally is if you know the current resident and you're able to meet with them and pick up your mail-in ballot, or somehow have some other arrangement to pick up your ballots were there. But still, 23,344 people voted when they should no longer have access, would not normally have access at that given address. We had 2,382 voters who voted in person, even they showed Melissa as having moved out of Maricopa County prior to that date. We have 2,081 voters who moved out of state in the 29 days before the election and appeared to be given a full ballot, which should have been, if anything, if they voted at all, it should have been a president-only ballot, where literally the only option on the ballot would have been president. That is something that is by Arizona statute. Let's talk a little bit about the voter rolls. So registration dates do not generally change in your voter rolls. So this is your day of registration, unless it's to correct a mistake. And this is something that we received out of the actual recorder's office. They told us that those dates should not generally be changing. Your date of registration should be your date of registration. And it says there at the end, the only time a voter may have two dates of registration is if the registration has previously been canceled and the voter registers again. The original record would be canceled for a variety of reasons, and then they'll have a new record with a new date of registration. So the old record should not exist, and it should not have a date of registration change. Likewise, we have this thing called AFSEEK. And AFSEEK is actually a unique identifier that is a reference to a transaction. So for example, if you went and you needed to change your address, you would fill out a form, and when you filled out that form, you would turn it into the recorder's office, and they would image that and they would process it. And when they processed it, they would assign it a unique identifier. That unique identifier actually gets stored in your voter rolls as the latest one, and it is specific to that change request. So those should be unique. You should not even have it twice in your voter rolls. It should only happen once, and it should not be shared among multiple individuals. And this is something, again, we confirmed with the recorder's office. Now, we also have a statute that says complete names should be used, and they'll get into our findings that we have here in a second. So we had as many as 5,047 individuals who voted in more than one county for up to 5,295 additional votes if these are duplicates. Now, I will tell you that these individuals had the same name, first, middle, and last name, and the same exact birth year, because that's what's in the voter rolls. But if you have an extremely common last name, which can happen, some of these may in fact just be individuals with the same exact name and same exact birth year. We have no way to validate that 100%. We had 393 voters with incomplete names that voted in the election. This included individuals with last name only. Last name is just an initial. There's no last name, or first name is just an initial. And again, there are some individuals who in some cases this could happen, but this is not a frequent thing that you typically see. We also had 198 individuals who registered after the October 15th cutoff and yet still voted in the election. And we had 2,861 voters who have shared an AFSEEK number with another voter at some point in time. And that does not, we don't know exactly what that means, but based on the descriptions of everything that's happened in the system, it suggests there may be some integrity issues with the data. When impossible situations happen in a system, and if you've got integrity systems in something as important as the voter rolls, there would be a concern. We have 282 potentially deceased voters in this election. I know that there's been some much wider numbers that have been circulated on the internet. We tried to validate this stuff very, very precisely. It can be a difficult thing to match up voter rolls to individuals. From our testing, we believe that all the ones we have in here are accurate, but there are potentially additional ones as well. We have 186 people who potentially have duplicate voter IDs that both voted. I think that Dr. Shiva was mentioning that we haven't had individuals with the same first name, last name, and the same address and seem to have the same signature. That is something that we have also seen in the voter rolls with people who seem to have literally the same exact name. We have 186 people, that's the case, where they actually, the first name and last name and the address, all match up, and year of birth. Because the assumption would be you might have a junior in a different place, and so they'd have a different day of birth associated with it, but not the same address. And that is the end of the presentation right now. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Ben Cotton, who's going to go over our digital findings.
Thank you.